Welcome everyone to SABC Online. It's so great to have you join us today. We're going to be spending some time looking into apologetics. This will help us explain and understand why we believe in God and how it applies to us. We have one song and then the message prepared for you guys today, so sit back and enjoy what we have in store for you.
Here, moving in our midst. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you, I worship you. You are miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, turning lives around. I worship you, I worship you. You are here, mending every heart. I worship you, I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Even when I don't see that you're working, even when I don't feel that you're working, never stop
Good morning, church. A common objection seekers have for believing in the loving God Christians believe in is the issue of suffering. C.S. Lewis put it this way: if God were good, he would wish to make his creatures perfectly happy. And if God were almighty, he would be able to do what he wished. But the creatures are not happy. Therefore, God lacks either goodness or power or both. However, this statement, although describing the thinking of many well, is actually simplistic and demonstrates a lack of thinking through the complexities of suffering. Every belief system needs to come up with an answer for why suffering exists. And friends, this is the reason that Christianity gives for the existence of suffering. You see, mankind was given free choice when they were created. God didn't want robots. He wanted to have people who had freedom to choose to follow him and be with him or not. And in the beginning, there was no suffering. Then, unfortunately, mankind chose to go their own way instead of following God, an event that Christians called the fall. And at this time, death, decay, and suffering entered the world. Mankind actually let it in. Now you might ask, wouldn't a loving God just fix it? Couldn't a loving God just cover over the mistake that they made? But what about the next mistake? And the mistake after that? And the mistake after that? Would God have to keep fixing it every time? And it wouldn't be long before you would realize that if there aren't consequences for making a mistake, then you don't really have freedom of choice. Freedom of choice and consequences need to go together. And if mankind didn't have freedom of choice, then we would be less than what we could be. No, God had to come up with a different solution than just fixing that original mistake. He had to come up with a solution that didn't take away our free choice. The Bible does promise, though, that not only was there no suffering at the beginning, but there will also be no suffering at the end when God brings the new heaven and the new earth into existence for all those who have chosen to follow him. The Bible also teaches that there are many reasons suffering continues around us today. Firstly, there is our own sin, the own mistakes that we make. We might steal some money and feel we are suffering because we end up in prison for stealing. A husband may get angry or mistreat his wife and feel he is suffering because she leaves him. We could put our hand in a fire and suffer because it burns. Selfishness, greed, lust, arrogance, and bad temper are just some of the bad choices we can make that bring pain and suffering into our lives. Secondly, other people's sin can cause us to suffer. We could enter a supermarket and another person enters as well with COVID-19 and we catch it. We didn't do anything wrong, but the person who came in didn't self-isolate, and so we can pick up the disease. We would be suffering because of the other person. Or someone drives in an erratic manner or at high speed and crashes into us. We could have been perfectly obeying the road rules, but we end up suffering because of that other person's mistake. Some people have estimated that 95% of the world's suffering actually occurs because other people have made bad choices. And sometimes, a third thing, that sometimes God will decide to actively punish sin. The biblical flood is an example of this with Noah. Sodom and Gomorrah is another, and there are occasional times in the Bible where actually God punishes individual people. But this tends to be the exception rather than the rule. It can exist, but it is rare. Lastly, the Bible also says that the world is groaning and reacting to the presence of sin. Sometimes our planet will release storms and acts of ferocity that cause incredible damage and suffering to people. The world is actually reacting to mankind's sin. So ultimately, all suffering exists because of sin, and sin exists because of free choice and making bad choices. Friends, unfortunately, we are all part of the problem. However, Christianity also says that although suffering is bad, God can turn it to good. Now, people can build incredible character through suffering, actually become better people because of it. They can have greater compassion, greater patience, greater long-suffering themselves. People can carry out incredible acts of kindness in the midst of suffering that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. And also during suffering, people get to experience a level of God's love and comfort and peace they wouldn't have opportunity to do any other way. Friends, although suffering is bad, God can turn it for good. And lastly, God is able to carry out purposes through suffering that bring hope for a better tomorrow. You know, Jesus suffered incredibly on the cross, one of the most incredible acts of suffering that ever existed. And yet, because of that suffering, we can have hope for tomorrow. As I close this talk, some people might say that it's a bit unfair for us to experience suffering when God is all-powerful and doesn't get to understand it from our perspective. As I mentioned earlier, God had to come up with a different solution for mankind's pain. Let me finish by reading the playlet, The Long Silence. At the end of time, billions were scattered on a great plain before God's throne. Most shrank back from the brilliant light before them, but some groups near the front talked heatedly, not with cringing shame, but with belligerence. Can God judge us? How can he know about suffering? Snapped a young brunette. She ripped open a sleeve to reveal a tattooed number under a Nazi concentration camp. We endured terror, beatings, torture, death. In another group, a young man lowered his collar. What about this, he demanded, showing an ugly rope burn. Lynched for no crime but being black. In another crowd, a pregnant schoolgirl with sullen eyes. Why should I suffer? She murmured. It wasn't my fault. Far out across the plain, there were hundreds of such groups. Each had a complaint against God for the evil and suffering he permitted in his world. How lucky God was to live in heaven, where all was sweetness and light, where there was no weeping or fear, no hunger or hatred. What did God know of all that man had been forced to endure in this world? For God leads a pretty sheltered life, they said. So each of these groups sent forth their leader, chosen because he had suffered the most. A Jew, a young black man, a person from Hiroshima, a horribly deformed arthritic, a deformed child. In the centre of the plain they consulted with each other. At last they were ready to present their case. It was rather clever. Before God could be qualified to be their judge, he must endure what they had endured. Their decision was that God should be sentenced to live on earth as a man. Let him be born a Jew. Let the legitimacy of his birth be doubted. Give him a work so difficult that even his family will think him out of his mind when he tries to do it. Let him be betrayed by his closest friends. Let him face false charges, be tried by a prejudiced jury and convicted by a cowardly judge. Let him be tortured. At the last, let him see what it means to be terribly alone. Then let him die. Let him die so that there can be no doubt that he died. Let there be a great host of witnesses to verify it. As each leader announced his portion of the sentence, loud murmurs of approval went up from the throng of people assembled. And when the last had finished pronouncing sentence, there was a long silence. No one uttered another word. No one moved, for suddenly all knew that God had already served his sentence. You know, friends, as I said before, every faith has to give an answer as to why suffering exists. And the Bible doesn't shy away from that. It gives good reasons why suffering is on this planet. But even more so, it gives hope in suffering. And that hope is in the fact that Jesus suffered and died for us to give us hope and a future. And let me finish with this verse from 2 Corinthians in chapter 4. Therefore we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles or suffering achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. Friends, whatever we experience on this planet, how terrible the suffering, in Jesus there is hope for eternity. God bless you all.
Thanks so much for joining us today. And our prayer is that you have sensed God's presence with you, whether that be through the worship time, whether that be through the message or the personal story that got shared at the end, but that somehow your heart has resonated with it. And if you would like to let us know how you have been impacted, or you would just simply like to get to know us better, you can email us on office@sabc.org.nz, or you could go to our website www.sabc.org.nz, or find us on Instagram or Facebook and like our page or follow us, just to kind of keep in the loop of what we're up to here at SABC. Now, if you would like to find and join in a deeper way with us and would like to give to the ministry here at SABC, all the details of how you can follow through with that are going to be on the following slide. Once again, we've loved having you join with us. Haere rā whānau.